Simon Cowell stopped the show. He pushed back from the judge's desk, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for his water glass but never picked it up. The audience fell silent. The other judges turned to look at him, confusion spreading across their faces. And then, for the first time in 20 years of television, Simon Cowell couldn't speak. But to understand what happened in that moment, we need to go back to the beginning. To a woman named Sarah Mitchell, a 42-year-old oncology nurse from Chicago, who walked onto the America's Got Talent stage carrying nothing but a microphone and a story that would shatter everyone who heard it. Sarah had spent 18 years working in the cancer ward of Northwestern Memorial Hospital. She had held the hands of patients taking their last breaths. She had delivered news that no family ever wants to hear. And she had witnessed moments of humanity so profound that they changed her understanding of life itself. But there was one patient who changed everything. A 7-year-old boy named Timothy. The producers backstage had no idea what was about to happen. They had scheduled Sarah as a singer, expecting a standard emotional performance. What they got instead would become the most watched audition in the show's history. Timothy had been diagnosed with terminal leukemia at age 5. For 2 years, Sarah was his primary nurse. She watched him lose his hair, his strength, his ability to walk. But she never once saw him lose his smile. Every morning when Sarah entered his room, Timothy would ask the same question. "Is today the day I get to see Simon Cowell?" You see, Timothy had one dream. Not to be cured, he understood that wasn't possible. His dream was to sing on America's Got Talent, in front of Simon Cowell, the judge he watched every single night from his hospital bed. Sarah would laugh softly and say, "Maybe someday, sweetheart." But someday never came. Timothy passed away on a Tuesday morning in March, with Sarah holding his hand. But before he closed his eyes for the last time, he made her promise something. "Sing for me," he whispered. "Sing for Simon. Tell him I wanted to be there." Subscribe now and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Sarah stood frozen on the America's Got Talent stage. The lights were blinding, the audience a sea of shadowy figures stretching into darkness. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped the microphone. Simon leaned forward, his signature skeptical expression firmly in place. "So, Sarah, what are you going to do for us tonight?" Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and finally said, "I'm not here to win a competition, Simon. I'm here to keep a promise." The audience murmured in confusion. Howie Mandel exchanged a glance with Heidi Klum. But Simon's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Something in her voice had caught his attention. "A promise to whom?" he asked. "To a 7-year-old boy named Timothy. He died in my arms 3 months ago. And his last wish was for me to stand here, in front of you, and sing the song he never got to sing." The temperature in the theater seemed to drop. Simon's jaw tightened. His hand, which had been casually resting on the desk, slowly curled into a fist. Backstage, producers were frantically checking their notes. This wasn't in the script. This wasn't planned. Sarah reached into the pocket of her scrubs, which she had worn deliberately, and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. It was worn, creased from being opened and closed hundreds of times. "Timothy wrote this," she said, her voice breaking. "He wrote it during his last week. He wanted Simon to read it, but he knew he'd never make it here. So he asked me to read it for him." She unfolded the paper with trembling hands. The audience was completely silent. Not a cough, not a whisper, not a single phone screen glowing in the darkness. "Dear Mr. Cowell," Sarah began reading. "My name is Timothy and I am 7 years old. I have cancer and the doctors say I won't get better. But that's okay because I got to watch you on TV every night, and you made me laugh when I was scared." Simon's face had transformed. The hard exterior, the calculated showman persona, was crumbling in real time. His eyes were fixed on Sarah, unblinking. "I wanted to sing for you so bad. I practiced every day even when it hurt to breathe. My favorite song is You Raise Me Up because that's what my mom used to sing to me before she went to heaven too. A gasp rippled through the audience. Sarah paused, wiping tears from her cheeks. I know I can't be there, Mr. Cowell. But maybe my nurse Sarah can sing for me. She has a pretty voice. Not as good as mine though. A small, broken laugh escaped from Sarah. Even Simon's lips twitched, though his eyes were glistening now. Please don't be mean to her. She's really nice. And tell the other judges I said hi. I hope I can watch the show from heaven. Love, Timothy. P.S. Golden buzzer would be cool but no pressure. And then it happened. Simon Cowell did something he had never done in 20 years of judging. He stood up from his chair, walked around the judge's desk, and stepped onto the stage. The audience erupted in confused whispers. The producers were in chaos backstage. This was completely unprecedented. Simon Cowell didn't leave his chair. Simon Cowell didn't break protocol. Simon Cowell was the protocol. But there he was, walking slowly towards Sarah, his expensive shoes clicking against the polished stage floor. The spotlight followed him, creating a halo of light around both of them. He stopped directly in front of her. For a long moment, he said nothing. The entire theater held its breath. Then Simon Cowell, the man known for his brutal honesty and cutting remarks, did something that would be replayed millions of times around the world. He wrapped his arms around Sarah and held her. Not a quick, performative hug for the cameras. A real embrace. The kind that says, I understand. I feel this. You are not alone. Sarah broke down completely. Her shoulders shook with sobs as she clutched the letter in one hand and held on to Simon with the other. The audience was crying. Heidi was crying. Howie had his face in his hands. Even the cameramen were struggling to keep their equipment steady. After what felt like an eternity, Simon pulled back. He kept his hands on her shoulders and looked directly into her eyes. Sarah, he said, his voice rough with emotion, I need you to sing that song now. Not for the competition. Not for the audience. For Timothy. Can you do that? Sarah nodded, though she could barely see through her tears. She took a step back, raised the microphone to her lips, and began to sing. When I am down, and oh my soul so weary. Her voice was shaky at first, cracked with grief. But with each word, it grew stronger. The audience sat in absolute stillness as Sarah Mitchell, oncology nurse from Chicago, sang the song that a 7-year-old boy had practiced in his hospital bed, dreaming of a moment he would never live to see. You raise me up, so I can stand on mountains. Simon remained on stage. He didn't return to his chair. He stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching with an intensity that had nothing to do with judging a performance. You raise me up, to walk on stormy seas. By the final chorus, something extraordinary happened. The audience began to stand. Not in a wave, but all at once, as if moved by a single impulse. Thousands of people rising to their feet, tears streaming down their faces, united in a moment of shared humanity. You raise me up, to more than I can be. The last note hung in the air, pure and clear, echoing through the silent theater. Sarah lowered the microphone. Her eyes were closed. She was breathing heavily, as if she had just run a marathon. For 5 full seconds there was absolute silence. Then the audience exploded. Not just applause, but a roar of emotion that shook the walls of the theater. People were hugging strangers. Some had collapsed into their seats, overwhelmed. The standing ovation seemed to have no end. Share this video and subscribe now, so this story will never be forgotten. Simon walked back to the judge's desk, but he didn't sit down. He stood behind his chair, both hands gripping the backrest, visibly composing himself. Howie spoke first, his voice barely audible above the continuing applause. I don't have words. That was the most beautiful, heartbreaking, incredible thing I've ever witnessed on this stage. Heidi nodded, mascara running down her cheeks. Timothy is watching right now. I know he is. And he is so proud of you, Sarah. The audience roared again in agreement. Finally, all eyes turned to Simon. The applause gradually faded as everyone waited to hear what he would say. This was the moment that would define the audition, the episode, perhaps the entire season. Simon cleared his throat. He looked at Sarah, then down at the desk, then back at Sarah. "I've sat behind this desk for 20 years," he began slowly. "I've heard thousands of voices. I've made people cry. I've made people angry. I've made people famous. I thought I had seen everything this stage could offer." He paused, his voice catching. "I was wrong," the audience murmured softly. "Sarah, I didn't know Timothy. But after tonight, I feel like I did. Because you didn't just sing a song. You brought him here. You put him on this stage. You kept a promise that most people would have let die with him. And that takes more courage than I have ever seen." Simon reached for something beneath his desk. The camera caught a flash of gold. Timothy asked for a golden buzzer. He said no pressure. But you know what? He was wrong about that too. Simon walked around the desk, his hand hovering over the golden pedestal. "This isn't for you, Sarah. This is for Timothy. This is for every child fighting a battle they can't win. This is for every nurse, every doctor, every human being who holds someone's hand when they're scared. This is for everyone who keeps a promise, even when it breaks their heart." He slammed his palm down on the golden buzzer. The theater erupted in golden confetti, cascading from the ceiling like a shower of stars. The music swelled. The audience screamed with joy. Sarah stood in the middle of the stage, covered in gold, laughing and crying simultaneously, Timothy's letter still clutched in her hand. Simon walked back onto the stage. This time, he didn't hug her. He stood beside her, facing the audience, and raised her hand in the air like she had just won a championship fight. "That boy is watching," Simon said, leaning into her microphone so everyone could hear. "And he's probably saying I told you my nurse was pretty good." The laughter that followed was healing, cathartic, exactly what everyone needed after such emotional intensity. As the confetti continued to fall and the audience refused to stop cheering, something remarkable happened. The entire judges' panel, Howie, Heidi, and Sophia, left their seats and joined Simon and Sarah on stage. The five of them stood together, arms around each other, as the theater celebrated not a performance, but a moment of genuine human connection. Backstage, producers were already fielding calls from networks around the world. Social media was exploding. The clip of Simon hugging Sarah had already been shared 100,000 times, and the episode hadn't even aired yet. But none of that mattered to Simon Cowell in that moment. As he stood on that stage, surrounded by confetti and cheers, he thought about Timothy. A boy he never met. A boy who spent his final days watching a reality TV show, dreaming of a moment that would never come. A boy who, in his last breath, asked someone to keep a promise. And that promise had been kept. Later that night, after the cameras stopped rolling, Simon asked Sarah to meet him in his dressing room. She arrived still wearing her scrubs, still clutching Timothy's letter. Simon was sitting alone, his makeup removed, looking more human than he ever appeared on television. "I want to keep it," he said, gesturing to the letter. "Not the original. But I want a copy. I want to frame it and put it in my office. So that every day, when I sit down to judge another person's dream, I remember why it matters." Sarah nodded, tears forming again. "And one more thing," Simon continued. "I'm establishing a foundation for children with terminal illnesses who want to experience moments like this. I'm calling it Timothy's Stage. Every year, we'll bring kids to the show, give them the full experience, let them feel what it's like to stand in that spotlight. Even if it's just for a moment." Sarah broke down completely. She had walked onto that stage hoping to fulfill a dying child's wish. She had walked off having changed the life of one of the most powerful men in entertainment. The episode aired 3 weeks later. It became the most watched audition in America's Got Talent history. Timothy's letter was published in newspapers around the world. Sarah's performance raised over $12 million for pediatric cancer research. But more importantly, it changed how people saw Simon Cowell. Behind the sharp tongue and the critical eye, there was a man capable of profound empathy. A man who could be moved to tears by a 7-year-old's letter. A man who would break every rule of his own show to honor a promise he hadn't even made. Timothy never got to sing on America's Got Talent. But through Sarah, through Simon, through millions of viewers who shared his story, his voice was finally heard. And somewhere, perhaps, a 7-year-old boy smiled and said, "I told you a golden buzzer would be cool." Some promises are easy to break. No one would have blamed Sarah if she had stayed home, grieved in silence, and let Timothy's dream fade with time. But she didn't. She walked onto that stage and changed everything. Simon Cowell has given thousands of critiques. But that night, he received one. A lesson from a boy who never reached 8 years old. A reminder that behind every voice is a story. Behind every dream is a heartbeat. And behind every cold exterior is a heart waiting to be reached. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss another moment that reminds us why we're human.